I'm Aryeh Schwartz, along with
Rachel Galligan.
And welcome to the Winsidr Show, where it's all about the W. What a wild last week we have had with so many moves and so much to discuss. Let's dive right in. And we are back with the Winsidr Show. I'm Aryeh Schwartz, and I'm very excited to discuss all things WNBA free agency with my co-host, Rachel Galligan. Rachel, what a week. Well, I think we're into like a week. It's the 8th, right? So we're a week into free agency.
Yeah.
How are you feeling? Are you personally, I'm just going to say this flat out. I'm more excited because I think we see more competitive rosters than we did last year. A lot more fun, at least intriguing rosters than we did last year, my personal opinion. Where's your head at? How are you feeling?
I agree. I think we're starting to see more of a complete picture of what these teams are going to look like. We're starting to, kind of get a clear picture of who won in free agency, who didn't win in free agency, who completely whiffed and struck out, the direction that teams are going. So, it happened so fast. It's such a whirlwind this past week. But I agree. I think the biggest talking point is I think you're seeing franchises that, were pretty desolate last year. And now you're looking at, I'm going to fall short of calling it multiple super teams. Because I'm personally not a huge fan of the super team.
Can we just, I find it so funny, one, how offended players get when their team is called a super team. That's a compliment. That's saying you have a lot of good players, and that means most likely you are one of those good players. So take it as a compliment. Secondly, I'm sorry, A'ja Wilson. Big fan of your super team. It is a super team. Whatever, if you're against the term, pro the term, whatever.
Dynasty.
But you add in, no, I'll wait for Dynasty. Let's see them make. I think they're definitely on the cusp of that. But 2 championships ain't a Dynasty to me. That's all. But I think she had a tweet something like, I don't see enough people talking about Seattle as a super team. It's like, okay, chill out. They got 3 really good players. That's not a super team. It's a 3-headed monster. There's terms for everything. Okay. Once you hit the 4-headed monster and above, then we can talk super team. But you brought up Vegas to some degree. You hinted at it. Biggest news, as you broke today, as we record, yesterday when the episode publishes, Candace Parker returning on a 1-year deal to Las Vegas Aces. What's your initial reaction to that move? Were you surprised to break that news? It's funny, take off you broke the news cap and tell me from a play talking about basketball. How do you feel?
I think it was never a question in my mind, was she going to return to Vegas if she could play? The question in my mind was she going to play from a health standpoint? Were we going to see Candace Parker back on the court this season? And I don't know that that's fully answered yet, even with the signing. I certainly hope so. I certainly hope that, she's on the right trajectory. The 1-year deal, I think, screams a lot, to the potential of how much longer does she really have, out on the court. But personally, I'm excited because to me, the signing means her progress is going the right direction. I think, you have some consistency there in Las Vegas, which they needed to secure in a player like Candace Parker. Even if there are health concerns and question marks as to, how much is she going to be able to give you this year? I just think it's a good sign across the board that they're maintaining that consistency. And I hope that it really means we will see her out on the court a lot more than we were able to last year. I think for her own sake as a competitor, I think that this year could be crucial.
Oh, yeah. Look, knowing the competitive nature of one CP3, the legend, the greatness, I think it was pretty obvious, at least in my mind, and from what you're saying, your mind, that she'd be coming back if she could play. And also, realistically, you go out with an injury, your team wins the championship. Now they're looking to do a three-peat. Why would she jump ship to go to a different team that's trying to prove something when it kind of almost feels like, and I probably will get flack for this, but it almost feels like an unfinished story because, yes, she gets that championship ring. She has 3 rings now. But, like, you know,
you want to be able to play the game that you love.
Well, exactly. And, like, you want to win it by playing it. You don't want to win it by sitting on the bench with a cast on your foot or whatever it was. So, yeah, I think, yeah. Okay, let's move on to Atlanta. Atlanta's a very interesting team because earlier on, they add Jordan Canada. And we're looking at this team like, okay, this is slowly, they're putting the pieces together. Alicia Gray, Jordan Canada, Ryan Howard, Cheyenne Parker, like that is a nice nucleus of a really good young team. And I like how those players complement each other. Canada can produce, as we saw over the past few years, going from almost being out of the league, honestly, to securing a core ring and a max deal if she wanted. Right. And then they make these moves. And I love that because I think she really complements Alicia Gray and Ryan Howard. But then they make these moves of adding Aerial Powers and Tina Charles, which, shout out, maybe the biggest shocker of free agency was Tina coming back to the league. I mean, all right, I'll just give you my take, Rachel, because we haven't even talked about this really. But like, for me, if Aerial Powers is willing to be a role player and understand that, like, because here's the thing, the journey of Aerial Powers was she was in Dallas, wasn't hitting potential, went to DC, won a championship, was shooting like crazy, but went to Minnesota. And I think, at least from my perspective, learned that in a specific limited role, she is a deadly asset for a team in a good way. When you try and expand her role too much, that's where it fails. And so that's at least my take on it. And then you add Tina, and Tina's just, I don't want to say a ball hog, but like she likes to shoot the ball a lot. Those 2 signings, while they add elements that I think this team needs, I worry about the negative aspects. Tina has not been the best situation in the last, 3 stops of her career. You could argue more, right? Like, DC was not great. Phoenix was a disaster. Seattle was not great. So for me, it's just like, I feel like maybe some clouded judgment by the positivities and forgetting the negativities that might come with these signings. What are your thoughts?
I actually really like the Tina Charles signing. We watched this team all last year struggle with depth on the interior and size. I mean, we just did. And now you've got a veteran player, who just didn't play for a year, and an opportunity now back with a team that has really good pieces around her. And I think, if anything, it frees up Ryan Howard. I think now you've got multiple, even beyond, you've got multiple scorers on this team that, if someone's having a rough night, you can be able to run the ball through different action. I actually really, really like this move. I like the fit for Tina. I think that she fills a much needed need for this Atlanta Dream team. Now it's going to be interesting, like you're saying, to watch it kind of all come to fruition on the court, but I'm not as concerned about, I guess the biggest question, I have is, where is she at right now in her career? A year doesn't make that huge of a difference, but how many years does she have left playing this game? And I don't know. I think that's going to be interesting to see how. I do think they got better. Atlanta got better,
definitely.
In my opinion. I think Aerial Powers, that was one. I was on the Locked On pod with Jackie Powell recently. Shout out to the Next for having me on. I appreciate that. But we were talking about the Aerial Powers move within itself. And that to me, I agree with you, all comes down to her ability to accept a role. And what is that role? And I think you hit the nail on the head. It's exactly what it needs to be. I think she's going to have games where she goes off for 25. That's what Aerial Powers does. But do they need her to do that night in and out? No, absolutely not. So I think, if anything, if there can be, open discussions about what that type of role and what that situation looks like this season and minutes played, those types of things, I think it can work. And Atlanta got deeper. They added a tremendous amount of scoring, in my opinion. And then I think Jordan Canada is a perfect fit, for this team, and just a true point guard facilitator. the more I sit here and talk about it, the more I'm like, man, I actually really do like these moves that Atlanta made. It was surprising. I mean, should we have really been that surprised? Like, did we really think that Tina Charles was just going to like, we weren't going to talk about her again? I mean, like, it's funny to me that, I mean, I didn't see a ton of talk about like that could be a potential signing. And so I think people were blindsided by it. I know I personally was blindsided by it.
Well, Rachel, when like, this isn't a secret, or it's the worst kept secret in the WNBA, didn't have a great ending in New York. Didn't like Connecticut, New York, DC, Phoenix, Seattle. That's 5 teams. That's almost half the league. So I think whether or not we saw it coming or not, it was more so like there's only like 6 options.
Yeah. But I mean, I love it. I'm excited about it. I think Atlanta got significantly better with the moves that they made. This is starting to look much more like a complete team to me. And I mean, the trajectory of this franchise as a whole is trending in the right direction. It'll be, I just keep saying, it'll be interesting to see how these different, styles of play and personalities come together on the court. But I don't see it. I don't see like red flags or, I don't know about that being a fit or anything like that. I'm more so curious. But I do think they got better. This is going to be an exciting team to watch.
Yeah, I think there's a few teams that I saw some people talking about Atlanta being a contender right now. I'm like, slow.
I'm going to fall short of that, but
yeah, slow the roll. So they got better. I'll even group Minnesota into, and we'll talk about Minnesota in a moment. But like Minnesota, similarly, I think they got better. Did they jump multiple tiers into contention? No, but they got better. Let's talk about Seattle though. Seattle probably, arguably, the biggest name of free agency. After kind of punting last season, they bring in Skylar Diggins-Smith. They bring in NECA. Now we're talking about a 3-headed monster, and maybe a 4-headed monster if you think Ezzy is there yet. I think we still need a little bit more time for Ezzy. And then you have that depth of shooting with Sammy. For me, this is a very top-heavy team, right? Jewel, Skylar, NECA. Let's include Mercedes and Ezzy. And then it kind of drops off. So for me, I'm curious to see. I know I'm not as high on Horston as some other people, but I'm curious to see kind of, do they make 1 or 2 other moves to add in depth? Because look, this team doesn't have the continuity, right? Like this team wasn't all together. This is what happens when you bring in new big name free agents. So for me, and NECA, I think NECA's contract was 1 year, Skylar's 2-year. I get it, CBA, fine. But like for me, it just says this team's going all in. If you're going all in, you need depth, right? You can't rely. It's so rare for teams to win it all without depth. So for me, it's just like, okay, who are you going to add that's going to be that role player, that shooting, and that versatility for this team? What do you think about Seattle?
I think there's no doubt, stating the complete obvious, this team got better. I love the 3-headed monster. I love the hype that's going to be around Seattle. I love what they were able to do in terms of, getting the money they needed. When you look at it, you look at the move they made with LA and to get that Kia Nurse contract off the books. It's clearly setting up and clearing the cap space to make the moves for Skylar Diggins-Smith and NECA. And so, we knew something big was coming when that decision was made to get Nurse off the books. But again, I mean, they're better. They're going to be a team that's going to be fun to watch. You've got star power, all the things that I think we've become so accustomed to seeing Seattle being, especially in obviously the last decade outside of last year. So from that standpoint, it's exciting. But again, the same thing. I question kind of the depth at times. We know Gabby Williams. I think you have some international question marks in your mind there with the Olympic year in terms of who's going to be there consistently, who's not, who's coming after I don't know exactly how that's
Gabby made that comment a while ago. She's not expected to come back, and they probably can't do the finagling they did last year to bring her back. So, and that's a huge blow because that would be a huge depth piece.
Yes, totally. So if we're talking about Gabby Williams playing this season, that because she's such a Swiss Army knife in terms of her versatility, then I'm even more excited about this team. But that is likely not the case. So yeah, I mean, do they have the cap space and opportunity to make a few more moves? Yes, but you kind of look around right now, who all is still remaining in terms of free agents, and those dominoes are falling as we're speaking, and might even, I'm sure a lot of that will come out even today before this podcast comes out. But I do think they can add, a piece to just try and help that depth. But that's going to be the question mark, and I don't think it's as bad as like Las Vegas depth at times.
No.
I'm pretty high on Horston. I think that the experience that she got from last year is going to translate really well to this year. I'm high on Dulcie. So I do think that you're going to see some of these young players continue to take a step in their careers. So I don't think the depth is like a glaring major concern, at least, in terms of what we've been talking about with Vegas for years. But I don't know. Nonetheless, I'm excited about Seattle. I played out exactly how I think the fans would have hoped. Having NECA and Skylar team up together in Seattle is exciting. And it feels like a new era building around Jewel Lloyd as well. So I feel good about Seattle. They had a really good free agency.
Well, the other team that arguably has had a really good free agency, I would say the two teams, fighting for number one free agency winners, or the free agency spot, has to be Seattle and then Phoenix. Phoenix bringing in Natasha Cloud, one of the top point guards, one of the top free agents in the league, bringing in Rebecca Allen in a trade, which is an interesting aspect that I would love to talk to you about. Shipping out Bree Turner, shipping out Michaela Onyenwere, bringing in Kahlia Copper. And this team, yes, I know they haven't signed Brittany Griner, and some people want to speculate, blah, blah, blah. If Beachy's coming back, I fully expect, and predict that it will be with the Phoenix Mercury. This team just, look, we can talk about personalities and all that jazz, fine, whatever, but they are going all in. They are, pedal to the metal for Diana Taurasi's maybe last season. They're pushing it. I can't hate it. They added shooting. I was sitting there before the Ka trade goes down, and I go, okay, cool. So you basically expect Natasha Cloud and Brittany Griner to just play defense for the whole team, right? Because what's Sophie and Diana Taurasi doing, right? Right? But then they make that move, and now it's just okay, defense is no longer a turnstile. You have defensive players, you have athleticism, you have shooting, you have versatility. I'm not going to say that this is a guaranteed contender, because I still think there's question marks. But this team, this is a super team. It has, right?
They're throwing, first off, it starts with the changes that took place in the offseason of the ownership and the front office and the staff. And this whole place has been a complete overhaul, and it's happened, and it feels like a blink of an eye. And so, good Lord, it was so dire. It felt like the last, 2 years? It's been a rough go in Phoenix. And so to kind of see it flip a switch, and you have this new life in this franchise, still tailored around Diana Taurasi. And so there's no time for a rebuild. There's no time right now to, necessarily worry about immediate assets and draft picks, stuff like that. I think that they've made really aggressive moves. I think they had their targets, and they were able to secure those targets. I think you have players now who aren't just looking at New York and Vegas as destinations in free agency. You're looking at Phoenix in that conversation now, because of the ownership, because of the investment, because of everything they're doing there behind the scenes. And so that's become a top target there in the Valley. And so it's going to be cool as we go on with time, and especially how the rest of this roster shapes out. I want to see, I genuinely believed that Elena Delle Donne, there was a very good chance that she was headed to Phoenix. And completely, deals fall through. People aren't able to come to agreements on things. Things play out in ways that even us, who kind of know some of the inner workings of things that are going on, can be surprising. And so, when I heard about Kahlia Copper, I'm like, oh my God, and we talked about it. We were texting, we're like, this makes sense. I just didn't think about Copper in my mind as even being a tradable asset in this conversation because of Chicago's investment in her and decision to, hey, we're going to give you the keys to the Corvette and we're going to build around you, and you're our person. And so then it was like, holy hell, like in a blink of an eye. I don't know how it went down. There's a lot behind the scenes, and I'm sure a lot that can be speculated. What went down in Chicago and how did that play out where it was such a 180 switch? But I will give Chicago credit signing her to that extension. And I mean, they got the farm. I mean, kind of the farm. They got a lot in return for Copper. And I love the fit of Copper in Phoenix with this roster. You don't have question marks of health concerns and how much of the season, like she's in her prime, she's in her absolute prime, and she's going to be someone who can be relied upon night in and night out. And like, it's phenomenal. That's a phenomenal move. I don't hate it for Chicago. It's just shocking to me the way it's shocking, but it's not shocking the way everything in Chicago played out. Clearly, not that I'm trying to pivot too much, but clearly Chicago struck out in free agency. Clearly the issues of Chicago, that's a podcast for another day. Their investment, their front office, their ownership, all the things there are major question marks. And I'm just not convinced that they're even remotely close to being in a position to attract top free agents. And so, Copper probably looking around going like, damn, like we're not getting the people here that I thought maybe we potentially could have got. This sucks. Whether that was a demand, whether that was, Chicago's, I don't know how, again, I don't know how that played out, but yeah, Chicago, that's a whole.
Well, we'll do a whole episode on that. I have a special guest in mind for that one. And we could talk about, because the Stu letting her walk for nothing is just mind boggling, but whatever. I thought of two things while you were talking about that. One, like keep in mind, people, Phoenix added 2 WNBA champions and 1 Finals MVP. If I'm going to throw out a hypothetical that Phoenix's plan going into this was to add Natasha Cloud and Elena Deladon, when Mike T, one of the stingiest GMs in the league, starts to maybe ask for too much, or maybe wants, doesn't want both players, but wants one player that Phoenix is willing to give, and it doesn't see eye to eye, Phoenix starts making calls around. Oh, and timing just worked out that Kahleah Copper is no longer super happy after seeing Chicago swing and miss on all the big free agents, and says, I see the writing on the wall. It's time for me to get out. The two things that came to mind is, one, I might get flack. I say things, I get flack for it, but I'm not going to lie. There's an element of me that, look, I'm not going to sit here and say the players owe the team anything or the team owes the player anything, right? Like, this is business. But at the end of the day, it definitely raises some eyebrows when you sign an extension, when coaching moves are made to your preferences, when off-season moves are made to be built around you, and then when you swing and miss one season, one time, that player who was the center of the design, the load-bearing, pole or whatever it is in the house. And to dip out at that, look, teams do this all the time to their franchise players on their own behest. So am I going to hate on a player for reading the writing on the wall and saying, I don't want to spend another year here if it's not working, when I don't have my own locker room, where I don't have a training facility, where, I completely get it. There's something to be said for both sides. There's multiple true stories going on here. And the other thing that came to mind that I'm not even going to let you respond to, Rachel, because I know it'll just start the long, and you might know where I'm going with this. The trade that they got back for Kahleah Copper, who's a Finals MVP, not a MVP, not the best player in the world, some might say is a sign that Seattle should have signed Stewie or cored Stewie a few years back and not letting her walk for free to New York and demanded a trade. If that trade would have happened and whatnot, I would and I know that's where you stand, I would push back and say, none of the players, like, look what Kahleah Copper was able to bring back in a trade. I don't see how a Stewie trade is going to bring you back assets better than Jewel Lloyd. That's a whole nother debate. One day, Rachel, we're going to have to do like alternate history.
And we're just going back and forth for like 45 minutes about it, and no one was betting. Yeah,
turned a group chat into a.
I will say the good news is we know. I was quoting Annie Constable. Shout out to the phenomenal work that she does about the directionless team, and I get what she's saying, but I do think from a standpoint of this franchise right now, yeah, it's a complete rebuild, but it feels a little bit more than that. It's not just like, oh, we're going to embrace a complete rebuild and they still don't have a ton of assets, guys. Okay. They've got number 3 this year. They've got to give up their 25 pick to Dallas next year because of the pick swap. It's not like they're going to be able to just be dominant in the drafts these next couple of years. I mean, in my opinion. So it is a rebuild. How they're going to continue to try and rebuild, they're going to have to do it through the draft, and they're going to have to find a way to get the investment and the ownership behind this franchise that should have been there the year after.
Rachel, I completely agree with you, but that's for the special podcast with our special guest who's got insider trading on Chicago. Let's talk about Chicago. Okay, so what does Chicago have now? Michaela Onyenwere, Bree Turners, and a ton of draft picks they got from Phoenix in that. But they let us do walk for free. And we've kind of already touched on this. Yes. In our last free agency episode, we talked about there's going to be 2 teams that are just going to completely whiff in free agency. It has become abundantly clear. No one can deny it. Rachel's hometown is that is that team. It's Chicago. Chicago's one of those teams. And it's not comparable. I mean, look, I think LA is arguably that other team, but at least LA is getting assets and is making the youth push. Now, I will say that I have my own pet peeves when it comes to LA signing a few too many of these vets, right? Like, sorry, if you're full in on the rebuild, if you're full in on the youth movement, stop signing Mo Billings, stop signing these vets. And there is, like, every year we hear the same narrative of there's so many great players who can't make it in the W. And the pushback I always give is, I disagree. I don't think those great players could make it in the W unless they had multiple years to grow. Well, we have a team in LA who has the ability to give some players time to grow and then have the rights to those players. So if I'm going to be picky with LA, which I like, look, these are bottom teams and they're trying to, set themselves on the right path towards success. For me, like, that's my critique for what LA is doing. And you've already touched on Chicago. Connecticut or Minnesota first, Rachel?
I don't even get to talk about LA.
You can talk about LA.
I would just say the difference between LA and Chicago right now is LA feels like kind of organized demolition and rebuild. Chicago, I feel like there was a complete blindsidedness. Now, you could make the argument about Nneka that maybe they felt blindsided about her not returning to LA. But it feels like, there's a little bit more of an embracement of, because you still have to fill the roster. You still need bodies. You still need players. I like the signing of Mo Billings. Mo Billings is not going to be, the person that wins you a championship. But you know what? She's a veteran player in the league. You've got the money to be able to throw at a player who has experience, who plays as hard as she does. And I think she's a good asset for this team. Is this team going to be out of the lottery? Probably not. But like, it feels like, at least with the assets they have, owning half the first round this year. Now, a lot of that is a question mark because of the COVID and who's actually coming out. We're going to be talking about that for the next few months until the cows come home. LA's, has to be crossing their fingers that, they're able to get the types of players they feel like they can, but ultimately they don't know. But it feels like because of the assets, there's going to be a much quicker turnaround in terms of this rebuild than it does in Chicago.
3 picks in the first. All right. Connecticut or Minnesota? Connecticut. Connecticut's a really interesting one because Connecticut almost feels like a team that for so long has been on the doorstep, to quote James Wade, right before they won the championship. They're at the well, now I can't even quote them. They're at the screen door and they just need to get the front door open. And this season, look, I will be the first to say it. Maybe this is the change, the light switch flip, the whatever that they needed to get over the hump and win a championship. And maybe we don't all see it because I don't think any of us see it. I think this team, while is still a top 4, top 5 team in the league, definitely a playoff team, has some superstar talents, arguably a super team by, Asia's definition of 3 good players. But adding Tiffany Mitchell and Mariah Jefferson and losing Rebecca Allen is not the move, in my opinion, that's going to win you championships. I think they are trying to brace themselves for the fall because losing Becca Allen was huge. I mean, they arguably could have made a push for the finals if Becca Allen doesn't get hurt in the semis. Tiffany Mitchell is not, Tiffany Hayes. I'm sorry. Mariah Jefferson is not going to provide the shooting that this team missed last year that could have helped propel them to the finals. So, and then also like, this is a different nuanced thing that most people are probably going to listen to and be like, what the hell is he talking about? He's crazy. The Becca Allen trade, right? Like at the end of the day, I think a lot of people are going to step in and say, oh, well, good for Becca Allen for signing with the team to do a sign-in trade. But did that trade help Phoenix more than it helped Connecticut? Is the question that I want to pose. I don't have an answer for it. But at the end of the day, part of the reason it went down was because Phoenix needed to move a contract to make it work and to make the other moves they wanted to do work. So for me, I'm sitting there and I'm starting to question Connecticut's GM also, because I sit here and I wonder, I see players leaving left and right, and this team, in my opinion, which doesn't really matter, right, getting worse. And then you do this trade, and I think you had so often when a team needs to make a trade, you have the advantage. And whenever a trade happens, one team is in a tougher position. And for me, Phoenix was in a tougher position. Connecticut, what do I know? But I feel like Connecticut could have gotten more out of it. Sorry, that was long-winded.
No, you're fine. I'm just trying to remember what was a part of the trade. There's just so much going on in my mind.
What was it? It was like Mariah Jefferson and a pick maybe for Rebecca Allen.
I mean, it's a blow for Connecticut. And I'm taking a step back, and I'm looking at this team. And there was question marks. Was Duana Bonner going to return? I mean, that the blow that could have potentially been. Now, it came out that she is returning. So that's good news. But it feels like to me that this team is doing everything they can to try and run it back and are grasping at straws to try and at least stay as good as they were last year. And I don't think you can look and say, oh, this moved the needle. They got better. Now, the good news is they got better because Bree Jones is going to be back on the court, and so you're able to kind of run it back with that core that we weren't able to see last year. Were you able to, put enough pieces around Mariah Jefferson, Rachel Banham, Tiffany Mitchell to help that core 3 of Alyssa Thomas, Duana Bonner, Bree Jones? So I don't know that I feel like, oh, this team got better. I think if anything, they maybe best case scenario, they stayed the same, but because you might have Bree Jones, a healthy Bree Jones back on the court, maybe they are just still in that contention conversation, because we know what the core of this team is capable of, and we know how well they play. And you've got a player like Alyssa Thomas, who's in the MVP conversation and very well could be again. I can't sit here and say they got better, but I also can't say that they got worse. I just feel like they're kind of holding on for dear life right now to try and just run this back as much as they can while also getting healthy. That's what I see right now.
No, I like how
the blow of Rebecca Allen is a blow that hurts.
Sorry, people are going to give me a hard time for this. We did not mention they also added Rachel Banham back to solve their shooting woes. I'm not even going to talk about that, but I just want to put that out there in case. I do appreciate that you were able to basically say what I wanted to say much more eloquently in like a third of the time. So sorry, listeners. Thank you, Rachel. Minnesota, like, okay, I have been texting Mitchell. I've been texting you. I've been going up and down about this team because on the one hand, I think for the past, it's almost like 5 years now, since the dynasty, I've been saying the same thing, which is like, you're literally doing the definition of stupidity, trying the same thing over and over and over, expecting different results. The same roster, it didn't work before. It's not going to work again. You got lucky. You made it to the semifinals in the wobble. It's not happening. And I like that Minnesota made different moves. They bring in Natisha Heidemann.
Ability to. That was the big thing, is they finally could.
Well, they finally could without having to, figure out a way to offload these horrible contracts that were just some of the worst contracts I've seen in WNBA history. Sorry. But no, I'm like, how much money was Natalie Achanwa making, and Ariel Powers and Kayla McBride? And like, you signed these players, you knew they weren't going to win you a championship, and you signed them for long term with good, whatever. Adding Natisha Heidemann, who you traded on draft night after you drafted her to get Lexi Brown for like a 2-year stint. Adding Courtney Williams, right? That right there adds depth and health to the guard game that was lacking, right? Now, a lot of people I've seen say Courtney Williams learned she could be a facilitator last year. Courtney Williams can facilitate, but it relies on other people being able to make shots, right? Mm-hmm. Like Chicago had Ka and Marina. They were making shots. They're shooters. Minnesota doesn't have those shooters. So you got to hope that Courtney Williams is able to make Kayla McBride that type of shooter in the terms of facilitating for her. That fee can now be elevated because it's not going to be, her carrying 4 other players for the whole season. Natisha Heidemann is a legit 3-point shooter, has experience, has deep playoff runs, and Alana Smith adds depth.
I like the addition of Alana Smith a lot.
I was hard on it. Some people have given me a hard time for it. I think now I like it better, especially with Milic not coming, sadly, even though, look, she's one of the best foreign bigs in the league. I think at the end of the day for Minnesota, they're not a contender yet. You cannot convince me they're a contender with this roster. But I will say they are better than they were years past. I'm not looking at this team and going, I don't know if you make the playoffs. I'm looking at this team and I'm saying, you're trying something different. You're trying to build around Fee. I've heard rumblings that Fee was very, very involved in some of these free agent moves, which I think is a good sign because you need to keep her happy. At the end of the day, if you are a top half of the team, so you're a 6 seed or lower, with a head coach of Cheryl Reeves' caliber and Nafisa Collier, an MVP player, don't put all your money against them is what I would say. So I think, look, they're making positive moves similar to Atlanta. I'm not going to bump you into contender, but I think you got better.
Yeah, I mean, we know that Cheryl Reeve, one of the greatest coaches in, history of the league, is going to find ways to put her players in position to be successful. And she's going to find ways to help this team be, to win games and to be competitive. I do think they got better. I think the most important thing, everybody needs a point guard. And I'm not convinced the Minnesota's done yet with their moves. I think you could very easily make an argument for a player like Odyssey Sims, could fit very nicely with this roster. I mean, so to be determined what happens with Sims, whether she goes back to Dallas or whether there's an opportunity in Minnesota. I don't know that Minnesota's completely done as these dominoes continue to fall. But I think the most impressive thing, and this is what I need people to kind of remember, everybody's going after the big names. You're going after the heavy hitters. You're trying to attract a Skylar Diggins-Smith. You're trying to get in the conversation with Natasha Cloud. You're trying to get in the conversation, with everybody who is, entertaining conversations right now. You have to. But what you also have to do, and this is what I think Minnesota excelled at this year, when people strike out and you don't get your A, do you have the relationships and are you working on option B and option C? And I think Minnesota did a really good job of, we're going to go after our targets, but we're going to make sure that we have a plan B, a plan C, and we're going to make sure that we fill out this roster the way we need to, where it does feel like it got deeper, it got better. And that is the point about Minnesota that I think they did a good job at this year. But no, they're not getting, unless all of a sudden Elena Deladon, ends up in Minnesota, which
I was going to say, Rachel, this now, look, the biggest name not on a team right now. I mean, she's not, you know what I mean? The biggest free agent still around. Yes, she's been courted. Has to be Elena Deladon. Now, we know that news broke her ideal locations were Phoenix or Vegas. Doesn't seem like those are plausible right now. What are they going to be giving up to Mike T to give in return? And so for me, I'm looking at it and I'm going, Deladon has to make a choice, her own personal choice. Is it more important for her to play or for her to play where she wants to play?
Yeah.
And if it comes down to that, I don't know what she's going to decide, but I'm looking around the field in this league and I'm thinking to myself, what is the best team she could realistically join and feel good about herself, but also feel like, hey, maybe this isn't one of the quote unquote super teams that everyone's expecting to be a contender, but I know they're going to be a good team and I know they have a good coach and they can make a push. And to me, that all those signals are Minnesota. I'm not saying I think she's going there, but I'm saying if I'm in her camp, that's what I'm saying to her. That's the advice I would give her. And if you look at it, and she doesn't need to be fully healthy, you have the combo of Dorka to, grow, ease in, learn from EDD. I think if that move happened, I would be very excited as a Lynx fan. I'd be very excited as Cheryl Reeve. And I would say to myself, we are looking at an extremely competitive WNBA 12 teams of rosters. Yes, there's some teams struggling, but there's going to be some really fun, competitive, exciting games with big names all over.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say Minnesota was solid. I don't know how. I think they got more consistent and deeper, and probably a little more chemistry ridden on this team. There may not be. We saw some issues the last couple of years. It is kind of a new era, but also you've got, the same building blocks that you want to continue to. Nafisa Collier's everything. Now you've got Dorka and Diamond Miller, who, again, in their second year, still have, with the way this roster is structured, still have the ability to make big jumps and contribute and be big contributors of this team. I don't think Minnesota's done with moves. Now, is that something just as, I don't want to say small, that sounds bad, but is it just, an added piece of some of these remaining free agents like an Odyssey Sims?
Well, she's not super tall, so you can say small.
There you go. Or I just don't believe, but again, I mean, I don't know. I would be absolutely shocked if it's fun to play the scenario with the Deladon thing, but I just don't see it happening.
Yeah, no, it's not realistic.
But it is fun to think about. And I understand the argument of why, if you're in this situation right now and you want to play, and Mike T needs to be able to get some assets. What's the situation where that potentially could be worked out? I get that
there's no way Deladon wants to stay in DC to play for this rebuild team, right? And then you think about that and you start going, okay, it's become clear based on her preferred destinations that were publicized. Being close to her family is no longer the main deciding factor in this decision. So I think there's many elements to it. I agree. It's more of a pipe dream, more of a, that would be really cool, but I don't think it's more of a video game move than a reality move.
That's a good segue for Washington. Let's talk about your team. Your hometown team.
Oh, all right. I live here for 12 years now. It's my hometown team. Look, Washington is very, very interesting for me. And I'm just going to put this out there, fully public knowledge. The head coach steps aside to be only the GM. His son takes over, and I know he had been there for a while, but his son takes over as the head coach. And the narrative we were told was the players love Aryeh. The players want to play for Aryeh. Well, we're a season later after an abysmal season last year, and the players are leaving Aryeh. So to me, you can be the best GM in the world and know who to bring and how to convince them to come and blah, blah, blah. But right now, you're not selling yourself in this roster. You're selling your son, who his track record is not the greatest in his 1 year and 4 games that he played when T was hurt. So for me, okay, great, rebuild. They don't have a choice because they can't attract free agents. They lost their key players. So now they're building a team around Ariel Atkins and Shakira Austin. And that's fine. Those are 2 really good players, and I'd be happy to have them to build around. But you're not going to be attracting big name free agents right now, which is why my assumption is Big T is very focused on getting as much as he can for Elena, because that's going to jumpstart the rebuild. And if you can't attract free agents, there's only 2 other ways to build this team back up, and that's the draft and trades. So I see him being very stingy in both and trying to push those things.
Which makes me wonder, what fell through with Phoenix.
Mm-hmm.
There clearly was not an agreement that was able to be reached upon. And so now, you're sitting there thinking, man, what can we get for Elena Delle Donne at this point. Your potential for return is starting to dwindle. It's starting to dwindle. And I don't know. Washington, it's just, I don't know really what to say about them right now. I really don't. I don't know. The good news is they have Mike T as the GM, and he's experienced and he knows what he's doing. And he's been known, we've talked about it time and time again, to pull a rabbit out of a hat and make things happen. So I don't think Washington's done. I don't think Dallas is done. Dallas has got to, this is a good segue for Dallas. Mm-hmm. Dallas has got to make some decisions and move on from some players.
Which has been the story for how long?
We say this every year, I guess, but like, there's going to be more trades is what I'm trying to say.
If I'm Dallas, I'm calling T and I'm saying Natasha Howard for Elena Delle Donne. I'm saying because while I think Howard adds an important element to Dallas, they have depth in the big. If you add a Delle Donne to replace Natasha Howard, I think you add some elements this team could need. And there's some other players too that I think could use the experience and grow from it.
Yeah. I mean, this is the part of free agency we're in right now where there's still a lot that's going to happen. And you could even talk about New York. Everyone's just kind of like, oh, New York is run it back. And like, I think they are, but there's some moves that can be made there too. What's going to happen?
Does Dolson go back?
What happens with Steph Dolson? There's a reason Stewart has, not like that contract hasn't been figured out yet. Like there's some things that are going to happen. That's what I'm trying to say. And I don't know if New York ends up getting involved or I'm looking at Washington. I'm looking at New York. And I mean, I mentioned Minnesota, but Dallas, like those three are going to have to, there's still moves that are going to be made. And you just look at, who hasn't announced the returns yet. Like that speaks to the negotiations that are taking place right now. And we're not done yet. That's the crazy part. It's still hard to look at Washington or even a Dallas and really sit here and be like, I can't give a complete picture as to how they did in free agency or how they did in the offseason, because I don't think we're even remotely close to being done.
Yeah, I'm with it. We ain't done yet. Rachel, before we log off for this episode, who's your GOAT?
Lynn Dunn.